a man built from stone and silence, who ruled with an iron fist and a face that had forgotten how to feel. Everyone revered him and addressed him with deep respect as the Alpha King. As for her, she was a herb woman's daughter, traded like a debt her father could not repay in coin, delivered to a castle that was never meant to hold something as fragile as hope. But she carried a secret no one had thought to look for. The night they met, her hands in a dying garden, his eyes catching gold at the edges in the dark, something ancient and irreversible had already been set in motion. What she didn't know was that someone else in that castle had seen it too, and had decided, quietly and methodically, to make sure it never grew into anything dangerous. Schedules were rearranged, reports were falsified. A bell rope was left to fray, slowly, deliberately, until the night it mattered most. So when she lay bleeding in the dark, alone, reaching through the bond for the one person who should have heard her, why was there only silence? What had really been done to them? And who had done it? Stay with us. The full story is about to unfold. The herb garden behind Lord Fauvel's manor had not been tended in years. Elowen Crestfall knew this the moment she stepped through the iron gate and smelled it. That particular sourness of lavender left too long without pruning. The faint rot beneath rosemary stalks that had grown woody and blind. She had not meant to come here. The torchlit feast hall was loud with men performing their greatness at one another, and she had needed air, and her feet had simply found the earth the way they always did. She crouched beside a struggling valerian plant and pressed the soil with 2 fingers. Cold and compacted. She clicked her tongue softly, the way her father's old gardener used to do. "You've been abandoned," she told the plant, though she meant something larger. She began pinching back the dead growth. It was not her garden, not her place, and she did not care. Moving down the row with her small pruning knife, murmuring the Latin names under her breath like a rosary. Valeriana officinalis, Melissa officinalis, Salvia rosmarinus. Her hair had come loose from its braid in the evening wind, curving red-brown across her cheek. She pushed it behind her ear without looking up. She did not hear him approach. She would not have, she realized later. He moved the way storms moved, without announcement, simply arriving. She became aware of him as a change in the air, a weight, a stillness that was somehow louder than the feast noise beyond the walls. She looked up. The first thing she saw was his boots, black leather, road-worn, too large for an ordinary man. And then she made the mistake of looking further. He was enormous in the way that old castles were enormous. Not ornamental, but built for something. Broad through the shoulders, the kind of breadth that came from real work rather than display. Dark hair pushed carelessly back from a face that was all sharp angles and old discipline. Jaw, cheekbone, brow. Except for the scar. It ran from his left jaw down to his neck, like a seam where something had been imperfectly healed, and it was the only imperfect thing about him. His eyes were the color of the sky an hour before a storm. Gray-blue, cold, utterly still. He was watching her with an expression she could not name. Not surprise, not calculation, something that had not yet decided what it was. Elowen stood. She was not small, she was simply not that, and she straightened her spine out of instinct, pruning knife still in hand. "This is not your garden," he said. His voice was low and very even. "No," she agreed, "but it was dying." Something moved through his face. She would not have called it amusement, it was too contained for that, but it was something adjacent. He looked away from her, to the herb beds she had worked over, and then back. Then it happened. She did not understand it the way the older women in her tribelands described it. They called it le coup de lune, the moon's blow, and said it felt like the ground dropping beneath you. What Elowen felt was simpler and more frightening than that. She felt recognized, as though something behind her ribs had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, and had now stopped. The man across from her went absolutely still. Not the stillness of composure, the stillness of something struck. His eyes changed color. Just at the edges, a thread of gold that had not been there before, spreading slowly through the gray blue, like ink through water. His nostrils flared almost imperceptibly, and she watched him identify the scent. She saw the exact moment he understood what was happening, and she watched him close it away behind his face, like a door shut against weather. "Leave the garden as you found it." His voice had not changed. That was what frightened her most. "You are Lord Crestfall's daughter?" "Yes." He nodded once, turned, walked back toward the torchlit feast hall as though nothing had happened, his broad shoulders cutting through the dark. Elowen stood with her pruning knife and a fistful of dead lavender stems and looked at the place where he had stood, the crushed earth where his boots had been. She did not ask his name that night. She did not need to. By morning, her father had come to her chamber with a face that tried to be neutral and failed completely. "The Alpha King Morthaine has requested a meeting," Lord Edric said carefully. Elowen looked at her hands. They were steady. She made sure of it. "I see," she said. She had imagined, in the careless way of girls who had read too many illuminated manuscripts, that if the moon ever chose a mate for her, there would be a conversation about it. There was not. Caelan Morthaine, and she did not call him Caelan. She did not call him anything. He was the Alpha King, and she was a debt her father's triblins could not pay in coin, informed her of the arrangement in Lord Favel's study, with the directness of a man reading a decree. He stood at the window. He did not look at her. His hands were clasped behind his back, and she studied them because they were easier to study than his face. Large hands. A scar across the right knuckle, half faded. He gripped his own wrist with a controlled pressure that she thought was probably habit rather than tension. And yet, "The union will formalize in a fortnight," he said. "Your father's lands will be brought into the Morthaine alliance. His debt is settled." She was 20 years old, and she had not raised her voice in a debt negotiation in her life. She kept her voice the same temperature as his. "And what does the Alpha King want from a herb woman's daughter?" He turned from the window. His eyes were fully gray-blue again, no gold at all, and they moved over her face once, with the efficiency of a man appraising a map. "Compliance," he said, "and discretion." She held his gaze for a count of 5. "You will have both." Something crossed his face. She decided later it was respect, though it did not look like what she had imagined respect to look like. It looked like a door, slightly ajar. Then he nodded and walked out. His brother appeared in the doorway afterward, younger, easier in his bones, with the same dark hair, but eyes that were warmer, darker. He looked at Elowen with an expression of such genuine apology that she almost laughed. "I'm Remy," he said, "his brother. I want you to know that I have told him he is being an idiot, on principle." Did it help? Absolutely not. He paused. "But I meant it." She did almost laugh then, the first time in a week. The night before the wedding, Elowen sat on the small balcony of her assigned tower chamber and unbraided her hair by moonlight. The castle below was finally quiet. Ashenveil Keep, they called it. Dark stone risen from dark cliffs above a valley full of mist. It was beautiful the way weapons were beautiful, designed entirely for a purpose that was not her. She did not know she was being watched. She found out much later, from Remy, who told her everything eventually, who had no capacity for useful silence, that Caelan had come to her corridor that night, had stopped at the far end of the hall and seen the candlelight through her open balcony door, had watched her comb her hair in the dark for longer than any man with genuine indifference would have watched. Remy told her with a particular careful tone that meant, "I want you to know this, and I will not tell you what to do with it." She did not know what to do with it. She only knew what had happened the morning after the wedding. She woke to an empty room that smelled faintly of rain. On the small table beside her bed, rough-hewn oak, Nothing like the furniture at Crestfall, everything here built for stone and severity, lay a single sprig of wild violet. No note, no ring, no seal, no mark of ownership. Just a small purple flower that had not been there when she slept. She held it for a long time. It was already beginning to close. She pressed it between the pages of her herbal. The wedding night itself she would not think about as romance, and he had not made it one. He had come to her chamber and sat on the edge of the bed, not beside her, at the foot, as though establishing a careful perimeter, and said words that she had not expected from him. "I do not love you." He said it without apology, without cruelty, the way he might state the height of a wall or the distance to a border. "I do not know if I am capable of it. I was not taught." A pause, barely perceptible. "But I will not shame you publicly. You will be protected. You will be respected." She had looked at him in the low candlelight. His profile, the scar running down his jaw, the way he held his own hands folded between his knees, as though managing them. A man, she thought, who had learned to be terrifying before he learned to be a person. "I'm not asking you for love," she said. "I'm asking you not to pretend." He turned to look at her. His eyes were unreadable. They were always unreadable. She was learning the texture of his blankness, the way you learned the texture of stone. But something in the set of his mouth changed. "I won't," he said. He slept in her room that night. Only slept. He was gone before the gray light reached the windows, and she lay in the cold of his absence and looked at the ceiling and thought, well, that is something. That is at least something. 1 month passed, then another. Ashenveil Keep was not built for comfort. It was built for survival and authority, and the kind of cold that came from 3 feet of stone in every direction. The corridors were too long, the ceilings too high, the fires too far apart. The servants were efficient and silent, in the way of people who had learned that speaking earned attention, and attention could be dangerous. Elowen learned the keep the way she learned plants, methodically, from the root up. She found the herb garden tucked behind the northeast wall and spent a week rebuilding it from neglect, ordering soil brought up from the valley, rearranging what had been placed incorrectly. The gardeners watched her the first day with skepticism, and the third day with something that looked like relief. She found the small library, 63 volumes, mostly military history and land surveys, 3 herbals in Latin with pages water-damaged and brown at the corners. She found the kitchen staff needed someone who actually knew which feverfew was good for headaches and which had been sitting too long. She found, slowly, a purpose that was not wife of the Alpha King, but simply person who is useful in a specific place. Remy found her on a Tuesday, with bread still warm from the kitchens, and sat beside her in the library without invitation. "You're not what he expected," he said. What did he expect? Remy considered this with apparent seriousness. Crying, probably. Crestfall brides cry in the old stories. He broke off a piece of bread and handed it to her. "Or scheming. Or swooning. You're doing none of those things." "I'm cataloging his library," she said. "Exactly," he beamed. "He has no idea what to do with you." She thought of this later, in the evenings, when she sat by the herb garden in the last light. She thought of how little she understood him in return. On the 79th day of their marriage, Caelan Morthaine walked into her garden and did not leave. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps were identifiable by now, heavier than any other man's in the keep, deliberate. And she looked up, expecting to see him pass. He did not pass. He stopped at the garden gate, which she had repaired 3 weeks prior, and stood there with his hands at his sides, in a way that was not quite casual, but was trying. She waited. He came in. He sat on the stone bench near the rosemary, the one she used when her back ached from crouching, and he looked at her working. "You can continue," he said, as though she had been waiting for permission. She continued. She was binding the thyme stems into drying bundles, her fingers moving from habit. She could feel him watching, not with the cold assessment she was used to, but with something slower. She tied a knot. Her hands were certain with the work, but her pulse had decided to be uncertain about other things. "What is that one for?" he asked. He pointed, and she looked up to see him gesturing toward the hyssop, leaning forward with his elbow on his knee, entirely unlike the man who stood rigid in the great hall. "Chest complaints mostly," she said, mixed with time for persistent coughs. "In the old texts, it's also used for—" She paused, reconsidering the Latin word. "For grief, actually. The monks used it." He looked at the hyssop for a moment. She could not read his face from this angle. "And the rosemary?" "Memory. Headaches and—" She almost stopped, then didn't. "I like the smell of it." He was quiet. She returned to her time. The light was going golden and long, laying itself across the garden like something considering where to rest. After a while, he said nothing more. He simply remained. She became slowly and painfully aware of how strange it was to have him in her space. This man who was everywhere in the keep in the abstract, whose authority pressed through every stone and corridor, but who had never once chosen to occupy the small world she had built for herself. An hour passed like that. Maybe more. When the dark came in properly, he stood. She heard the shift of cloth and weight. "That one," he said, and she looked up to find him pointing at the rosemary again. "What is it called?" "In Latin?" "Salvia rosmarinus," she said. He nodded once, as though filing it away. Then he walked back to the keep. She sat in the dark garden for a while after. Her hands were still in her lap. The time bundles were finished. He sat with me, she thought, for an hour, for nothing. She did not know what to do with the warmth of it. She tried pressing it down the way she pressed dried flowers, flat, preserved, taken out of season, and she was not entirely successful. The following morning, 2 servants arrived at the garden gate with 3 sacks of rich black valley soil and a small cart of good compost. No note, no explanation. She stood at the gate for a long moment. Then she put them to use. 3 months later, on a morning when frost was new on the stones and her breath came out in small clouds, she found him in the training yard at first light. She had known he came here alone in the early hours. Tilda had mentioned it. Tilda, who knew every current in the keep the way riverfish knew water. She had not planned to come here. She had simply walked until her feet found him, which was becoming a problem she hadn't named yet. He was working through a sword form, complex, long, the kind of thing you didn't do for practice, but for peace. His shirt was open at the neck, his dark hair pushed back, sweat already cooling in the cold air. She stopped at the edge of the yard. He moved like the scar on his jaw. "This is the thing that happened, and I survived it." Every motion, economy. No waste, no display. She watched his hands on the hilt, those large, careful hands, and she thought, with a sudden clarity that alarmed her, that she had been looking at his hands a great deal lately. "Caelan," she said. The sound of his name in her voice, bare, no title, nothing around it, made him stop. He turned. In the pale morning light, he was very large and very still, and, in some way she couldn't account for, younger looking than he ever seemed in the hall. The cold had put color in his face. He looked at her, and she watched his expression do something she hadn't seen it do before, something small and involuntary, a fractional softening around his eyes that was gone almost immediately. "You should have a coat on," he said. "I need to tell you something." He set the sword against the rack. He was very quiet, the kind of quiet that meant he was listening with more than his ears. "I'm carrying your child." The silence afterward was about 4 seconds long. She counted them. He picked up his coat from the peg near the door, well-worn wool, too large for anyone else in the keep, and walked to her. She held very still. He settled the coat over her shoulders, and for a moment his hands were on her, fingertips just touching the cloth over her collarbones, and she had to make a conscious effort not to breathe differently. "Inside," he said, low and even. "I'll send for Sir Margot." He stepped back. She felt the cold come in where his warmth had been. She walked to the keep. She did not look back to see if he watched her go. Later she would learn from Remy who saw everything, who told her what she needed to know with the careful love of a person who understood that information was a form of kindness, that Caelan had stood in the yard for a long while after, sword forgotten, looking at the ground where she had stood. But at the dinner table that evening, when Caelan told the council, in his measured way, that Morthaine would have an heir, and said to her across the table, "I am satisfied with this," and looked back down at his plate, she looked at his coat still draped over the back of her chair. She ran one finger along the collar. She understood. The yard was real. The table was performance. She was not sure yet which one to trust. The 4th month arrived, and with it the cold that had no intention of leaving. Sir Margot was a compact, gray-haired woman who had been delivering Morthaine children and managing Morthaine ailments for longer than Caelan had been alive. She was the only person in the keep who spoke to him without softening her voice first, and she had told Elowen on the first day, "You are carrying an Alpha King's heir. This child will be more than your body was designed to manage. You will listen to me, or I will make your life difficult in very specific ways." Elowen had agreed to listen to her. She had not told Sir Margot that she had been listening to her own body since she was 12 years old, cataloging complaints and remedies in the back pages of her herbal. She didn't need to. The old nun had looked her over once, head to toe, and said, "Good. You're sensible." By the 4th month, the child was making its presence known in ways that concerned Sir Margot and exhausted Elowen. The baby's alpha blood was dense, concentrated. She could feel it like a tide pulling at something central, some deep resource she hadn't known to conserve. She slept more, she ate less. Not by choice. The cold of the keep, which she had tolerated before, had become genuinely punishing. Sir Margot began telling her things she did not want to hear. "The bond link between a mated pair regulates the alpha blood in a pup," Margot said, not making it gentle, because she didn't believe in gentleness when precision was needed. Proximity, not medicine, not prayer. His presence quiets the child. His presence feeds your own reserves. Elowen looked at her hands. The knuckles were beginning to ache. "He doesn't sleep in my rooms," she said. "I know." "He hasn't in 2 months." "I know." A pause. "Lady Isolde's schedule for him has been convenient," Elowen said. "Yes, Lady Isolde Vane." Elowen had learned her from the outside in, the way you learned a plant you weren't certain was safe, carefully, without touching, watching for signs. She was from the Vanmore tribe lands, an alpha female, which in itself was rare and unremarkable. She was elegant, dark-haired, strategically brilliant. She stood close to Caelan in the way of a woman who had decided proximity was a kind of argument. She was also, Elowen had slowly concluded, systematically ensuring that Caelan could not find his way to his wife's side. The council meetings that ran through dinner, the border dispatches that required immediate attention on the afternoons Sir Margot had scheduled Caelan's presence. The reports Isolde relayed to the Alpha King about the Luna's health. "She seems well enough, my lord. You know how first pregnancies are. Women become rather dramatic." Which Elowen knew about, only because Tilda had the habit of going invisible and hearing things. Tilda, 17, quick as a sparrow, the daughter of the keep's steward, had attached herself to Elowen in the first week with an open sincerity that Elowen had been too lonely to refuse. She was the one who brought warm broth in the evenings and sat on the floor beside the bed when the pain was bad, reading from the old folk stories in her careful provincial French. She was the one who had first noticed the pattern in Isolde's movements and said, with the direct ruthlessness of someone who had grown up watching the powerful, "She's afraid of you, my lady." She should be afraid of nothing I have, Elowen said. She's afraid of what you could have. Tilda pulled her knees to her chest. If he ever looked properly. Sir Margot put the case to Caelan on a Wednesday in the war room, with the maps still spread on the table between them. She was brief. She was specific. She listed the declining indicators, the fatigue, the blood pressure, the way the child's alpha aura was drawing on resources the mother did not have to spare, in the flat language of someone who had said the sort of thing to powerful men before, and knew that softening it only gave them room to argue. She needs you near, Margot finished. Not a physician. You. Caelan was standing at the window, in the way he always stood at windows, as though the view were a document requiring analysis. He was quiet for a moment. The Eastern Lords are mobilizing, he said. If Valkras tests the border while I am sitting in a bedchamber, you are not sitting in a bedchamber. You are ensuring your heir survives to inherit whatever border you're protecting. Silence. Give her medicine, he said. Resources, whatever she needs. Tell the Treasury. She doesn't need the Treasury. Margot's voice was the temperature of old stone. She needs her husband. Those are different things, my lord. And I would have thought you intelligent enough to know it. She left. Elowen, who had been in the corridor because she had been going to the library and had stopped because she heard her own name, pressed her palm flat against the wall beside the door. The stone was very cold. She stood there until she had finished deciding something that she had been deciding for a while without realizing it. She walked to the library and read until dark. She did not cry, because she had already used her tears on things that mattered more. There was a night in the 6th month when Caelan was in the eastern corridor, late, coming back from the council chambers. He heard, through the closed door of Elowen's room, the sound of Tilda's voice, the girl's particular Breton accent, lilting through a story about a fox who stole a fisherman's best hook and had to return it piece by piece, and underneath it, every few minutes, a sound that might have been a small laugh. He stopped. His hand came up and rested against the door, the knuckles he never used to think about, against old oak. Remy came around the corner, saw him, and stopped. Neither of them spoke. Caelan's hand stayed on the door for a long moment. Then he dropped it. He walked to his own chambers without looking at his brother. And Remy stood in the corridor and looked at the door and thought, close, but not close enough. In the 7th month, Elowen's ankles were swollen, and she was still sitting at the window every afternoon, working. She had moved from embroidery to something more practical. Small quilts, small blankets, tiny garments, baby things. The stitching was careful and very fine. Small wolves in blue thread, silver stars on white cloth. The kind of things a woman makes when she has decided that this child will be loved, regardless of what else is happening. When she has decided to furnish joy out of her own hands, because there is no other supply. Caelan came in once to sign a document that required her seal. He stood at the writing table while she brought the seal, walking slowly, her back curved, her breath short. And he did not look at the piled blankets on the chair beside the window. He looked. She saw him look. She watched him not say anything. She watched him sign the document and set the quill down and walk to the door. She watched him stop. You should let someone else do that, he said, without turning. If your hands are painful. They aren't, she said, which was not entirely true. Another pause. Then he left. And that evening, without announcement, without explanation, 2 servants brought 6 new candles and a large stack of seasoned firewood, and arranged them near the window without being asked. She sat with the extra warmth and the extra light and thought, he is speaking to me in the only language he knows. I am learning to hear it. I just wish it were enough. The labor came in the deepest part of the night, between the hour of Compline and the hour the keep held its longest silence. Elowen woke to pain that was different from the ones she had catalogued. Not the persistent pulls she had learned to breathe through, but something sudden and central, something that seized her whole body and refused to negotiate. She lay still for 3 counted breaths, the way Sir Margot had taught her. Assess before you act. The assessment was not good. She reached for the bell rope beside the bed, the rope that had frayed at the top fitting. Tilda had mentioned this to the head steward 6 weeks ago. She had mentioned it in her exact, precise way that left no room for ambiguity. Came away in her hand. Limp. Useless. She lay for a moment looking at the rope. Then she reached toward the bond link, the silver thread of it that should run between herself and Caelan, mate claim and moonmark, and found silence. A closed door. A wall he had built for the battlefield and forgotten to dismantle. She understood, then, with a clarity that pain makes simple. He does not know. He cannot know. He is hundreds of miles away, and I have no way to reach him. She got herself to the floor. Cold stone, the cold she had never stopped fearing, under her palms and knees. She made herself breathe. She thought about the valerian in the garden, the hyssop for grief and chest complaints, the rosemary for memory, and she thought, not tonight, not like this. She reached for the window and pulled herself upright, and used the last reliable thing in her body, her voice, to call for Tilda. Tilda, who had been awake anyway. Tilda, who had her own particular sense for her mistress's distress, the way some animals feel weather. Tilda, who ran barefoot to Remy's rooms and pounded on the door with both fists and said, breathlessly, just 2 words. "She's bleeding." Remy carried her himself. She was lighter than he expected, and heavier than he could bear, and he held her against his chest and ran, and he was talking to her the whole time, in a low, controlled voice that cost him something to keep controlled. Sir Margot's chambers were in the lower keep, built into the old foundation where the stones were thickest, and the halls between were very long at the hour when everything is wrong. The child arrived in candlelight and crisis. Sir Margot's hands did not shake. They had never shaken in 40 years of this work, and they did not shake now. She moved through the emergency with the authority of someone for whom an emergency was simply a situation with more variables. She talked to Elowen in a low, constant murmur. Not comfort exactly. Information. The specifics of what was happening. Because she had learned that Elowen was a woman who wanted to understand, and that understanding steadied her. Elowen heard the instructions. She followed them. She held on to Sir Margot's wrist at one point, and said, in a voice that was very clear and very quiet, "The baby. If it comes to it, the baby." Margot pressed her hand once. "Don't borrow trouble." 10 seconds of silence that lasted longer than silence should. Then a cry, small and new and furious. The cry of something that had decided to exist, filled the low-ceilinged room. Elowen let out a breath that was half sob and half laugh, and closed her eyes, and everything got warm and very distant. And then it went away. Remy had never broken through his brother's warlock before. It was not done. It was the kind of violation that in another context could be read as aggression. Punching through someone's closed mental shielding during active combat was the sort of thing that ended friendships, and sometimes started wars. Remy knew this. He also had his sister-in-law's blood on his shirt, and a heart that was going to beat its way out of his chest if he didn't do something. He closed his eyes. He gathered everything, all the panic and love and controlled terror that he had been carrying since he ran down that hall, and he drove it straight at the wall in his brother's mind with both hands. The wall was built well. Caelan had always built things well. It took 3 attempts. On the 3rd, he felt it crack and pushed through and said, "Elowen is bleeding. There is a lot of blood. You locked the link, Caelan. She couldn't reach you because you locked the link." At the eastern encampment, 300 miles from Ashenveil, the Alpha King of the Morthaine tribelands was standing on a ridge above a valley full of enemy fires, and Lady Isolde Vane was speaking to him about flanking formations, and he was only peripherally listening because his mind had gone to a place it often went lately, a garden, in late light, a woman with red-brown hair murmuring Latin to a dying plant. Then Remy hit him like a hammer. The sword in his hand, He had been holding it without knowing it, command habit, hit the ground. He didn't hear it. He heard only, "She couldn't reach you because you locked the link." He had forgotten. In the discipline of the campaign, in the long practice shutting down of everything that was not strategy and survival, he had locked the bond link and forgotten to unlock it. He had made himself unavailable and called it professionalism. "Alpha," Isolde's voice, sharp. "The formation." He turned to look at her. He had looked at her 100 times, but this time he looked at her from the other side of something he had just understood, and what he saw on her face, in the second before she controlled it, a flicker, quickly gone, of something calculated, passed through him like cold water. "Retreat," he said. "We withdraw at dawn. The position is not more important than the air." He was already moving. "Organize the withdrawal. You have command until Remy returns." He went to his horse without waiting for her answer, and he rode out of the camp and into the dark, alone, which was not wise and did not matter. He rode for 6 hours. The horse was the best in the Morthaine stables, a black destrier who had been bred for endurance, who could run through the kind of dark that Caelan was asking him to run through now, through the dense oak forest, along the ridge roads, without torchlight, by sound and instinct. Caelan bent low over the horse's neck and thought about a garden. He thought about the violet on her bedside table the morning after the wedding. He had not meant it as a gesture. He had simply found himself holding it, had left it because he didn't know what else to do with the feeling. He thought about the afternoon in the herb garden, the silence they had shared that felt like the quietest thing he had been a part of in years. He thought about the way she had called his name, just his name, no title, in the cold training yard, and how something in him had gone very still, the way water went still before it froze. He thought about every door he had walked past and not opened. He thought, "I knew. I saw. I chose not to look." The forest was dark around him, and the horse's breath made white clouds in the cold, and the first time, the actual first time, in 14 years of ruling, of warring, of being the man other men looked at for certainty, Caelan Morthaine let something through the place in his chest where he kept things that couldn't be allowed. He did not cry for long. He was not built for long. But in the dark, alone, with the trees going past and the keep somewhere ahead of him, and his wife's silence in the bond where her voice should have been, he cried. The way men cry when there's no one watching, briefly, and with the totality of someone who does not do it often enough. Then he straightened. He urged the horse faster. The son of the Alpha King of Morthaine came into the world in the low-ceilinged room beneath the keep at the 3rd hour of the night, 7 weeks before he was supposed to, weighing less than he should have, and he was angry about it. He announced this anger immediately and without reservation. Soeur Margot had heard thousands of birth cries. She could tell you what they meant, the way a musician could tell you a key. And this one said, "I am here, and I intend to remain here, and I have opinions about it." She allowed herself half a second of relief. Then she turned to the other problem. Elowen was still. The blood that should have stopped was not stopping. Her pressure had been dropping for 20 minutes, and Margot had been pouring everything she had into managing it. The yarrow and shepherd's purse compresses, the cayenne tincture, the hands pressed firm against the source, and she was running out of management options. "Don't you go quiet on me," she said to Elowen, the same way she might speak to a stubborn patient who is being difficult. "I have not been doing this for 40 years to lose you in my own room. You hear me? You are not allowed." Elowen's lips moved. No sound. Margot pressed harder. She called for Tilda, who was already there, who had been there the entire time, who was 17 years old and handling this better than most adults would. And she said, "Hold this. Press. Don't let go." Tilda pressed. Her face was white. Her hands were steady. Margot began the old deep working. Not medicine now, but something older. The thing the moon touched passed down through generations, like a language that couldn't be written. The deep cellular encouragement that had no mechanism she could explain, but worked because it always had. She had done it perhaps 30 times in 40 years, only when everything else was insufficient. She felt the moment the heart slowed. "Non," she said, flat and simple. She pressed both palms flat to Elowen's sternum and she pushed. Not physically, but the other way. The way that could not be described in any text, and said, "You have a son who is crying in this room right now. He needs his mother to be here. Come back." The heart stopped. 4 seconds. Tilda, on the other side of the table, made a sound she tried to suppress. The heart started. Small, irregular, inconsistent, present. Margot sat back on her heels and breathed out for the first time in a while. "Good girl," she said, very quietly. Caelan's horse came into the keep courtyard at speed. A horse ridden that hard, for that long, without pause, by a man whose alpha aura was coming apart at the edges. The grooms scattered. Someone caught the horse before it could hurt itself. Caelan was already inside, moving down the corridor, and the effect of him on the keep at that hour was considerable. Torches guttered as he passed. The stone floor vibrated slightly with each step, the way it did during major tribunal gatherings, the way it did when the Alpha King was pushing past the controlled mask that was his primary form of governance. Servants pressed themselves against walls. 2 soldiers in the inner corridor bowed almost double without deciding to. Remy was at the end of the hall. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes red and his shirt still carrying the evidence of the night, and he looked at his brother coming toward him and did not move from the doorway. "Move," Caelan said. "No," Caelan stopped. They were the same height, Remy perhaps a finger shorter, and Caelan had 100 pounds of muscle on him, and they both knew it, and it did not matter. Remy met his eyes without flinching. This was new. Remy had been practicing this for months, looking at his brother the way you looked at a wall you decided to go through. "She nearly died tonight," Remy said. "The bell rope in her room has been broken for 6 weeks. Tilda reported it. It wasn't fixed. She had no way to call for help. She tried the bond link and hit your lock." The silence was total. "She crawled to the window," Remy said, quieter now, more careful. "She's 20 years old, and she crawled to a window to call for help, in the middle of the night, alone, and you were 300 miles away, managing a border dispute." Caelan's hands were very still at his sides. "Step aside, Remy. Are you going to tell me I'm wrong first?" A pause. In the hallway, a torch crackled. "No," Caelan said. He met his brother's eyes and did not look away. "I'm not going to tell you you're wrong." Remy stepped aside. Sore Margot was in the corridor outside the medical room, washing her hands in a basin. She heard Caelan coming and did not turn around. She was a woman who understood the usefulness of small demonstrations of indifference, particularly toward people with too much power. "How is she?" His voice, behind her, was not the voice she was accustomed to. It was thinner than usual, like a fault line, the kind you didn't see until the ground moved. She finished drying her hands, turned. He looked terrible. 3 days of travel in his face, no sleep, the gray-blue eyes stripped of their usual evenness and showing something underneath that she recognized. She had seen it on fathers in delivery rooms, on soldiers carried back from losses. The expression of a person who has realized too late what they were holding. She had been angry at him for months. She was still angry. She let the anger do what it needed to do, and then she set it aside, because this was not a moment for satisfaction. "She's alive," she said. "She lost a great deal of blood. She'll be weak for weeks. The child is small, but he has his father's lungs, and his father's apparent conviction that the world should accommodate him, so he'll likely be fine." She paused. "She was conscious when I left her, but not fully present. I'd rather you see her in the morning." "I'll see her now." Not a request. She looked at him for a moment, then she stepped aside. The room was very quiet, candlelight only. She had turned the torches down, she always did after a hard labor, kept the light gentle. The room smelled of yarrow and blood, and the faintest trace of the lavender she burned to clear the air. Elowen lay in the narrow bed, in the exact stillness of someone who has used everything they had. Her hair was unbraided, spread across the pillow like something exhausted. Her face was the color of old wax. Her hands, those hands, the time-calloused hands, the embroidery-careful hands, lay open and still on the blanket. On the small quilted blanket, he noticed, the blue wolves and silver stars. Caelan pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down, which he did not do gracefully. He was not built for graceful sitting. He sat the way he did everything, with full commitment, no hedging. He reached out. He hesitated. Then he picked up her hand. It was cold. He held it between both of his. His hands were always warm, a body temperature thing. The alpha blood running hot even in winter. And he felt the slight weight of it, the small bones, the roughness of her palms that came from real use. And he sat with this for a long while. Elowen. He said it quietly. Her name without anything around it. I know you can't hear me. He stopped, restarted. I will say it because I need to. He looked at her face, the small, exhausted face of a woman who had been trying very hard to be fine with things for a long time. And he said, I remember the violet. In the garden. I don't know why I left it for you. I picked it, and I was holding it, and putting it down felt like... I don't know what it felt like. He turned her hand over in his. I remember that afternoon with the rosemary, when you said you liked the smell of it. I remember standing outside your door at night, hearing you laugh. I couldn't make myself go in. He exhaled. I don't know how to go in, Elowen. No one taught me how. A candle guttered. He waited until it steadied. I'm sorry, he said, for the locked link. For leaving. For looking and choosing not to see. He set his jaw for a moment, the way he did when he was managing something difficult. I don't have better words than that. I know that's not enough. He sat until Sir Margot came to take the baby for the feeding, and then he sat some more. The boy was brought to him the following morning. Small was perhaps insufficient. He was impossibly small. Nested in Margot's capable arms, wrapped in one of the blue wolf blankets, a face still puckered from the recent insult of existing. And Caelan looked at him for a long while from across the room. Remy, leaning in the doorway with a cup of something hot. You can hold him. I might break him. He's not particularly breakable. A pause. Also, you're afraid of him. I'm not afraid of him. A pause. I don't want to do it wrong. Remy set his cup down and crossed the room and physically placed the child in his brother's arms before Caelan could construct a counter-argument. He adjusted Caelan's hands to the correct position, here and here, support the neck, and stepped back. Caelan held his son. His arms were rigid with care, the careful rigidity of someone who is very afraid and will not show it except through the excessive precision of their movements. The baby regarded him with the unnerving focus of the very new, dark eyes traveling over Caelan's face with what appeared to be serious assessment. He has your eyes, Remy said softly. The child wrapped one small fist around Caelan's smallest finger without apparent reason, just gripped. Caelan's jaw worked. He was looking at the top of his son's head, at the fine dark hair there, and his expression was the most unguarded thing Remy had seen on his face in 10 years. He's so small, Caelan said, which was not brilliant, but Remy thought was possibly the most honest thing his brother had said in months. Lady Isolde arrived at the keep gate that evening. She came with 3 attendants and the composure of a woman who had already constructed her explanation. She had not been invited. She had not been told to come. But she came, and she stood at the outer gate with her chin lifted and her hands folded, and her face arranged in the expression she used for things she planned to manage. Remy had been waiting. He had spent the hours of the night, while Caelan sat with Elowen, while Sir Margot stabilized the baby, while Tilda slept on a pallet in the corridor out of pure refusal to go anywhere. He had spent those hours with the keep steward, who was a thorough man who kept thorough records. With the head secretary, who had logged every schedule, every dispatch, every communication that had crossed the desk of the Alpha King's chief counsel. He had what he needed. "Lady Isolde," he said it pleasantly. He had his brother's face for controlling expressions, though he used it less. "You'll stop at the gate." She stopped. Something shifted in her eyes. "I've come to assist in the management of the records show," Remy said, "that you scheduled 4 council sessions and 2 cross-tribal communications on the 6 afternoons that Sir Margot specifically requested the Alpha King's presence with his wife. I have the dates. I have the transcripts." He paused. "I also have the report you gave him in September, that my sister-in-law was performing weakness for attention. The exact phrase. The steward wrote it down." The silence was thorough. "The council will hear this tomorrow," he said. "Tonight, you'll stay in the village. You will not re-enter this keep." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back the way she had come. Remy watched until she was through the outer gate. Then he went back inside to the warmth and the candlelight, and the sound of a small baby announcing his ongoing opinions about the world. The candles in Elowen's room were changed every 4 hours. This was not standard practice. This was Caelan's instruction, given once and adhered to, because the room was not to be dark and it was not to be cold, and if those 2 requirements were met through a somewhat excessive use of candles and firewood, the economics of that arrangement were not a topic for discussion. He read to her. She was not conscious in any sustained way. She surfaced briefly, sometimes, said half-sentences that might have meant something, drifted back. Sir Margot said this was normal, that the body, after what hers had done, needed time on its own terms. She said, "Talk to her." The familiar voices help. Caelan did not have facility with sentiment. He had not read aloud since he was a child, and he had not been a child for a very long time. But there was, in the small library 3 corridors away, a worn herbal in Latin that Elowen had been working her way through when he first noticed her there, and he brought it to her room, and he read it. He read badly. He stumbled over the Latin declensions. He mispronounced hypericum 3 different ways across 2 nights before settling on one and committing. He read in the even tone he used for dispatches and military briefings, which was the wrong tone for de materia medica, but the only one he had. He read about valerian for anxiety and chamomile for fever, and the application of plantain poultices to joint complaints. He read about the proper season to harvest elderflower, and the difference between the beneficial and toxic species of yew. He read every night. Tilda stood in the corridor outside the room on the 4th night and listened for a while to the Alpha King of the Morthaine tribelands, carefully mispronouncing Symphytum officinale, and then correcting himself with a brief, irritated silence. She covered her mouth with both hands. Then she sat down on the cold floor, with her back against the wall, and cried quietly, the way you cried when something was too much, and there was nowhere larger for it to go. The Council of 7 Lords convened on the 8th day. Remy presented. He was methodical, which he had learned from his brother, and he was thorough, which he had developed in self-defense against his brother. He laid out the pattern, the schedules, the false reports, the systematic erosion of the bond between Luna and Alpha at the specific moments when it was most needed. And he did it without drama, because the facts were dramatic enough without his assistance. Lady Isolde sat at the end of the long table and maintained her composure until the 3rd document. And then she maintained a different composure, the kind that cost more. At the end, the council looked to Caelan. He had not spoken for the duration. He sat at the head of the table, with his hands flat on the wood and his face closed, which was normal, except that his eyes were doing something none of the 7 lords had seen before, which was being in the room in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. "My lord," the eldest lord said, "do you oppose the charges?" "No." He looked at his old once. "I do not." The deliberation took 2 hours. The finding was clear. Isolde was stripped of her alliance rank and her access to the Morthaine lands, and expelled from the council's jurisdiction. Afterward, when the lords had gone, Remy asked, "How do you feel?" Caelan looked at his hands. The question was genuine. Remy only asked genuine questions. "Late," he said. It was 18 days after the night of the bell rope. He was reading. He had been reading the same page for 20 minutes. Something about the cultivation of saffron in southern regions and its application to melancholic conditions, and not retaining any of it. Elowen lay still, the way she had been still for 18 days, and the candle between them burned down steadily. Her fingers moved. He set the book down. He did not know he did it. He was simply sitting, and then he was still, in a different way. The stillness of something paying absolute attention. The fingers moved again. And then her face. Something traveled across it, a small weathering, the expression of a person surfacing from very deep water. "Elowen," he said. Barely sound. Her eyes opened, not all the way, halfway, the gray-green of them fogged and unfocused, the color of the Keep's valley on mornings when the mist was still in the trees. "Elowen, I'm here." She blinked slowly. The fog began to clear. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, and he stayed perfectly still. Hands on the chair arms, nothing about him that could be read as pressure, as demand. And let her look, because she had earned the right to look at him for as long as she needed. She swallowed. Her voice when she used it was a ruin. Dry, thin, smaller than her voice should be. "How long?" 18 days. She absorbed this. Her gaze dropped to his hand, his left hand, the one resting near hers on the blanket, and she looked at it the way she sometimes looked at plants she was trying to identify. Then she moved her hand away. He felt it, the small, precise withdrawal, gentle as a door easing shut. "Elowen, I know who you are." Her voice steadied as she used it, gaining back its quality, that particular quality of hers that was careful and honest at once. "You are Caelan Morthaine, Alpha King." "Yes." "You are not—" She stopped, tried again. "You have not been my mate, not in any way that matters." He did not argue. He held her gaze. "I know," she said, and something in her voice that had no name, something that was not accusation but was not gentle either. "That you read to me, in the herbal, badly." The smallest thing, perhaps the beginning of something that was not forgiveness, but was the acknowledgement that the reading had happened, and she knew it. "I heard you, from wherever I was." He said nothing. "I wanted to come back," she said, very quietly. "When I heard you reading, I thought there might be something to come back to." She looked at the ceiling. "But I opened my eyes and I looked at you and There's nothing, Caelan. The bond is gone. My wolf cut it to survive." She turned her head to look at him. "I'm not angry. I'm telling you. It's gone." The word "gone" landed in the room like something dropped. "I can rebuild it," he said. "I know how. You cannot buy back what you threw away." She said it without cruelty, without heat, with the same steady accuracy she used to measure everything. "I said that wrong. You didn't throw it. You ignored it until it stopped." She was quiet for a moment. "I think you didn't know. I think you genuinely did not understand what you were doing." She exhaled. "That makes it not better, Caelan. Just different. More sad, somehow." He sat with this. The candle between them burned. He sat with what it meant to have a woman look at him with clear, exhausted eyes and say, "More sad, somehow," as though his ignorance were the most heartbreaking version of the story. "What do you want?" he asked at last. She looked at the window. Dawn was coming, the sky outside going from black to the particular dark blue that preceded gray. "To go home," she said. To Crestfall. My father's lands. She paused. My son. He comes with me. The council reconvened, at Elowen's request, when she was strong enough to sit upright. She sat at the long table in a chair that had been made comfortable with every cushion Tilda could locate, and she presented her case in the same voice she used to speak to the keep staff, to the apothecary in the village, to Sir Margot. Measured, specific, without performance. She named what she wanted. A house in Crestfall, a good one, with land. The right to manage her own affairs. Her son for the first year, with Caelan's access governed by agreement rather than authority. And the legal acknowledgement, before the council, witnessed, recorded, that she was a free woman making a choice, not a subject being managed. The council murmured. It was unusual. It was not technically without precedent. They looked to the Alpha King. Caelan was at the head of the table. He had been quiet the entire time. The way he was quiet when he was hearing something that was reaching places his face was not prepared to show. My lord, the eldest lord said, do you contest this? He looked at Elowen. She looked back at him without anything she needed to hide, because she had already made her decisions. And there was a peculiar peace in that. No, he said. I don't contest it. He paused, and something crossed his face. Not the controlled blankness, but the thing underneath it, which was a man learning what he should have known sooner. She is right to ask for these things. She deserves more than I gave her. A lord at the far end of the table started to speak, something about alliances, about political implications. Caelan turned his head and looked at the man, and the man stopped. After the session, when the hall had emptied, Remy found his brother standing at the tall window, looking at the valley. The mist was in the trees below. You let her go, Remy said. Yes. She might not, I know. He didn't turn from the window. This time, I'm not going to decide what she needs. I made that mistake. A pause. I made that mistake many times. Remy stood beside him. They were quiet for a while. There's an old lord in the eastern provinces, Remy said finally. He told me once that the hardest thing for a man like Caelan is not the grand dramatic gesture. The hardest thing is the small daily one, the ordinary proof. He sounds irritating, Caelan said. He was. He was also right. The morning of the departure was cold and clear, the kind of autumn morning that had no apologies in it. The horses were ready. The wagon, Elowen had been offered a litter and had declined it, she preferred to see where she was going, was loaded with everything she had brought and everything she had made, including the herbal, pressed flowers between its pages, including the embroidered blankets neatly folded, including, tucked in the smallest bag, a sprig of dried violet that had been pressed between pages for nearly a year. She dressed herself without help, which Tilda argued about and lost. She came down the steps of the keep's main entrance in gray wool and a blue cloak, her hair braided back, looking not like a Luna, not like a bride, not like any of the things the keep had been trying to make her, looking like herself. Caelan was at the top of the steps. She had not expected him there. She stopped, one step below him, and looked up at his face. The jaw, the scar, the gray-blue eyes that were not doing the controlled thing this morning, that were just looking at her the way she had always privately wanted to be looked at, which was directly, as a person who was real and specific and unrepeatable. She held his gaze for a moment. She thought of the garden, the hour of silence, the violet she had pressed. She did not say any of it. There was nothing to say that would fit in the space before a departure. She stepped past him and walked to the wagon. Tilda was already there, the baby settled in the curve of her arm. He had not been named yet. She had decided to name him somewhere else, on her own terms. And Elowen climbed up and sat, and the driver clicked his tongue to the horses. She did not look back at the keep. She looked at the herb garden, visible past the northeast wall, still green some of it, and then at the road, and then at the oak forest, gold and ochre with the season. She heard Remy ask, behind her, What will you do now? She heard Caelan say, "Write to her. Every week." She may not answer. I know. The wagon moved into the forest. If this story touched something in you, drop a comment below. Tell me which moment hit hardest. Was it the violet, the rosemary, the letter he almost never sent? Your words genuinely keep this channel alive. So if you want more stories like this, a like and subscribe means everything. See you in the next one.